All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi everyone, welcome to our webinar today. Today's webinar is What's New in version 7.4 of the Fledermaus suite. The presenter today will be Danny Neville. He's the Fledermaus product manager, and I will be sitting on the panel. My name is Erin Heffron, and I'm a product specialist for Fledermaus. I'm just going to do a few slides to introduce you to how to interact with us while you're taking part in the webinar. So this is what your interface looks like right now, and I apologize for my blurry screenshots, but I hope they get the point across so that you can at least follow along. This is your viewer where you will see the presentation, and this is where you can type questions to us. So now we're going to now focus on that part of the interface. The orange arrow will open and close your panel, so you can click on that to close it or to reopen it. Under View, you can control if it's full screen, window, etc. This is where you can look and test your audio. Most of you are probably using mic and speakers to attend, but you can also call in using a telephone. If you click Use Telephone, it gives you a phone number, an access code, and an audio pin. That audio pin, if you type that in, it will allow you to speak to us if you choose to do that. The easiest way to submit questions to us is via text. I'll be watching that during the whole webinar and trying to answer as we go. I will also, if necessary, post some questions to Danny so that everybody can hear it and he can help me out. You can raise your hand if you want to talk to us verbally. That's a little bit harder to control, so questions are usually easier. We will be addressing questions that I don't address over the questions dialogue. We'll address those at breaks at the end of the session or by email if a follow-up is required. And within a few days, everyone will receive an email with information about how you'll be able to download this because we will be recording it. So bar any technical difficulties, you should be able to get the recording later. If you have audio problems, this is where the FAQs are. I know that's impossible to type that link in, so you can go to GoToWebinar. It's hard to see, but that says 24/7 support, and there's some information about audio here. If you ever have any webinar requests, comments, or ideas, you can email me at heffron@qps-us.com or webinars@qps.nl. If you have general questions about Fledermaus, Quincy, Castor, you would like to request a quote or evaluation, I direct you to our webpage. Again, sorry about the blurry screenshots, but at the top there's a thing that gives you all the products. You click on the product of interest and that will give you some information, or you can click on sales. If you click on sales, it gives you all of the contact information. If you click on a product, it gives you information about the product, and this says sales and information. That will give you links to the product sheets where you can evaluate the software, where you can also contact us. You could, of course, also use any of these emails down here. If you have bugs, feature requests, and other client support issues, we would like you to contact support, so you can go through support there. That will bring up the support portal, and the preferred way to talk to our folks in support is through the ticket system. You can access that here. There's also a link to the ticket system under this big contact support button. And if I click on that, contact support, this gives you the ticket system, telephone numbers, but you can use all of these methods to contact our support folks. All right, so that does it for me. I am going to change presenter to Danny now. And Danny, you good to go?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Erin. Okay, today I'm going to take about half hour, 45 minutes of time, depending on questions, and just go through what is new in the latest release of Fledermaus. So this release is from a couple weeks ago, and we're excited about the new things that we've put out in this version. So I'll take some breaks after each major section of the demonstration and the talk, and if there's any questions at that time that Erin hasn't been able to answer or is good for the overall group, I'll stop at that point and answer some questions. First, I want to talk just a little bit about who I am. I've been working on and with Fledermaus since 2000. I've had various roles, starting with development with Fledermaus. And as of the beginning of February this year, I've started as the product manager for Fledermaus. Now, if you have support questions, or if you have problems with the software, specifically support-oriented, as Aaron described, there's the contact information in the way of having support. But I'm also interested in talking and hearing from people at a product management level of how you use the software, how you'd like to use the software, features that you'd really like to see, or things from a workflow perspective that you find are not good or are great. I'd like to hear from you, and so there's lots of different ways you can get in touch with me. Some of the best ways is via email, neville@qps.nl, and also giving me a call. I'm not always available at my desk to answer your phone calls, but we would love to talk to you. Also, we can set some time up on Skype or anything like that. So I'm really interested in talking to our users and getting an idea of what you like and what you don't like, and that helps us in where we go in the future with our products. So in terms of getting in touch, it's also important to know where I am. Our office that I work out of is in Fredericton, New Brunswick, which is on the east coast of Canada. I spend most of my time there, and we're in the Atlantic time zone. But I'm also, every so often, I'm in our Portsmouth, New Hampshire office. So if you're ever in any of those two areas, please get in touch, and we can get together and go over details about Fledermaus. So for our agenda today, I'm really going to start with just a little quick overview of the Fledermaus product suite. But for most of this presentation, there's going to be an assumption that you're already fairly familiar with the products and what they do. Then I'll move into looking at the graphic engine improvements that we've released in 7.4, talk about what parts have been improved and where we're going with that work. Then getting into the new direct Quincy project support that we have in Fledermaus. Then I'll take a little bit of time to look at the FMGT and Midwater improved workflow, kind of related to the direct Quincy project support in Fledermaus. There's some similar back-end technologies across both of those new features. Then I'll also be looking at some general usability improvements. Then at the end, just have some bits and bobs, just some random things that are still some really good features, but they're just kind of like little point items that I want to highlight at the end of the presentation. So just do a quick overview. When we talk about the Fledermaus suite, Fledermaus is the main visualization module, the main application, but there are also a number of other applications that make the entire Fledermaus suite. So I'm just going to quickly go through those. You might be very familiar with them, but I'll just take a minute for people that aren't. So there's also the cross-check application, which is a point-to-surface comparison tool. DMagic is an important part if you're doing a lot with our PFM and area-based editing tools, as that's where you do your project creation and management. Then we get into the FMGT, which is a specific application for backscatter processing and mosaicing, and then FM Midwater for water column processing. FM Command is a utility that puts a nice front end on our command line tools. You can access those command line tools directly on any command line, but FM Command just makes it a little easier to access, gives you a bit of help information. So that's just kind of a way to help you out. We also have our iView 4D, which is a free viewer that can be downloaded from our websites, distributed to clients. It's a great way for distributing your data to people that don't have the Fledermaus application. Then just rounding out the group, we have OmniViewer, which is an attribute viewer. Any of our the data formats that we read for ungridded data, things like GSF, raw.all, you can open those up in the simple OmniViewer application to look at the data in a spreadsheet type view. It's a good way if you have a file and you're not sure what's going wrong when you're trying to import it. A good tip is just to open up an OmniViewer, and if you can't read it in OmniViewer and you're not seeing good values, well, something is not working along the chain. Either there's a corruption in the file, or we're not being able to read that file properly. So it'd be worth getting in touch with support about that. But it's a good base level. It's the simplest way that we're reading a file, so it's a good way to check your data. And then we have Route Planner, which is an application for creating and editing routes. And then at the end we have Vessel Manager, which is a small application for real-time vessel location and feeding that into Fledermaus in a real-time or non-real-time mode. Now all these applications are available in a couple different bundles. I won't go into too much detail here, starting from FMViz 4D, ranging up to FM Pro, which contains all of the applications and a few in between. So they just are different bundles of the applications to best suit what your needs might be. Okay, so now I'm just going to get into some of the improvements that we've done in the software for 7.4, starting with one of the biggest ones, which is our graphics engine. What we've done for this release is really an evolution of the core graphics engine. Over the years, there's been huge advantages in graphics card capability, a lot of that driven primarily by the computer gaming industry. And what that has enabled is that there's a lot more capability than we can take advantage of in these modern graphics cards. But it does take some time for us to rewrite our software and to optimize our rendering to take advantage of that. And this is what we've started to do, and we're rolling that out in these new releases. With this new release that does take advantage of the new capabilities, some are object types, and one of the primary ones are surfaces. The improvements are quite large. We have up to a 50 times improvement compared to older versions of Fledermaus. So the key improvements that enable us to do that is twofold. One, we have a redesigned internal data structures. Going back to surfaces again, as well as images, they're now tile-based. So rather than having one whole surface, it's been subdivided internally into tiles, and we have some sophisticated algorithms that allow each tile to have its own best resolution. Now keep in mind, this is for rendering. This doesn't affect your product. This is not something that you need to worry about in terms of gridding resolution. This is all done dynamically and behind the scenes. Now that affects and improves surfaces and images, but also we've done a general overhaul and improved how we monitor the frame rate. One thing we've always tried to do with Fledermaus is keep it very interactive. We don't want you to be sitting there as your scene chugs along as you try to move. Interactivity is key to what we like about our software. Now with that, we always monitor the frame rate. So how quickly are we able to move around the scene? What we've done in 7.4 is we've really improved how we monitor that. So what that allows is even object types that are not yet optimized with the new rendering can have advantages, and they are degraded less because we can reduce the degradation that is required to keep that interactive frame rate. That particularly applies to points and lines for this release. So there are some new requirements to make use of this rendering. In particular, you need a video card that has OpenGL 3.0 support or newer. Now that's actually not that difficult. For most desktops, that means that it would be anything that's 7 years or newer, and most laptops probably around 4 years, because the video cards in laptops usually lag a little bit. So it's something to check on to make sure that you have a video card that does support Fledermaus with the new rendering. Now, we do still recommend dedicated graphics cards. With the integrated graphics cards that come on either a motherboard or integrated a lot of times in laptops are getting much better, but we still prefer and recommend if you go with a dedicated graphics card. The performance is better, and one of the biggest things, the compliance with the OpenGL spec is often better with dedicated graphics card. It just makes your experience that much better. Now one thing to be careful with is video or laptops with dual video cards. This has become more popular. Most of the Apple high-end laptops have this. And what it is you have a dedicated graphics card as well as an integrated. And it tries to dynamically switch depending on your power usage and your power requirements. So the idea is that it uses the low power card when you're trying to save energy and extend your battery life, and then when you're plugged in is using the more high-powered video card. You do have to be careful though, because sometimes your settings and your energy savings, you may never be using your dedicated graphics card. So it's just something to be aware of, and it's very, it's very specific to your individual cards and your individual laptops. But be aware and just make sure that if you're doing a lot of visualization in Fledermaus, it's good to be plugged in if possible. And you can also override the setting. If you're using it on battery, you can go in and override the setting specific to your laptop so that you're using your dedicated video card over the integrated one. So now I'm just going to give you a few examples of the rendering. This is something a little hard to show on a webinar because of lag. So what I've done, I've put together a series of screenshots showing examples between the 7.3 software and 7.4. The first one I'm going to show is a surface image rendering example showing that where we're rendering in tiles. What you probably won't even see it, but the tiles are rendered from the center out and they're seamlessly stitched together. And that's important because you can have some systems with dynamic resolution and dynamic tiling, and you end up with a lot of cracking in your surface. And that's something we wanted to avoid. Now, with the faster surface image rendering, you'll also have an advantage that the graphics power can speed up the other objects in your scene, even though they're not optimized at the level that the images and the surfaces are. So I'm just going to move to an example here. This is a scene that has a couple different objects in it. We have a terrain model with imagery draped on top of it. I have a chart as a geo-image, so as a 2D image, and I also have a vertical image in it. Now this is showing it in 7.3 in the interactive mode. Always in Fledermaus, when you stop moving, when you stop interacting, it will always go to the highest resolution. So what I've done, I've taken a screen capture of it in interaction in 7.3. Now I'm going to switch to the same scene in 7.4. In this situation, we can see a number of improvements. The terrain is at pretty much the highest resolution already while interacting, and most importantly, your chart that is in as a 2D geo image is at a resolution that you can now see the details while interacting. So I'm just going to switch back to the original 7.3 and then moving to 7.4. Definitely a big improvement in terms of the resolution that we can provide of the data during interaction. Now, I talked about point and line rendering, and it has, we have improved the quality of the point and line rendering from the frame rate optimization. Just taking an example of a large 3D point set, when you're interacting in the 7th version, 7.3.6 of Fledermaus, the points were degraded by a factor of 256 to 384 times. So that's a significant amount of degradation. On the same hardware, but with 7.4, interacting with the same 3D data set, the degradation was minimized and is now only at 8 to 26 times. So much less degradation. So the idea is that you can now see a lot more of your points interactively while you're moving around in your scene. So taking a look at an example of a large point cloud, in this situation, using the 7.3 software, we can see that there's some points, but it's very difficult to see, what is actually what we're looking at in our point cloud because our degradation is at 256. Moving to 7.4, our degradation is quite a bit lower, and you can clearly see what our object is that we have in this point cloud. So a much bigger improvement. So we go back and forth, take a look at the 7.3. A lot of points skipped, not a very good way to interact with your data. 7.4, much improved. Now the other part that I want to talk about for the engine improvements is 3D models. Here's an example of a 3D model in 7.3.6 during interaction. Again, a lot of degradation. And that's one thing that in 7.3, we never really degraded 3D models very well. It really just started dropping out polygons, and you just end up with kind of a cruddy-looking 3D model that's difficult to work with. And that's really important when you're trying to use it in a real time. You're moving your vessel or an ROV throughout your scene in a real-time fashion. That's kind of crappy when your model starts degrading and dropping out polygons. So switching to 7.4, now the model has pretty much no degradation. And for any reasonably sized models, at this point, we've had difficulty on just some common hardware finding 3D models that have any degradation. So that's a big improvement for bringing in 3D models and having that interact within your scene. So to do a summary of the rendering, most of the improvements are with surfaces, scalars, and images. And that also includes vertical images that you might be using for sub-bottom or different data types, as well as 3D models. That's where we really change how we do the rendering and take advantage of the GPUs of the graphics cards. Points and lines, still rendering the same way, but with less degradation from the frame rate optimizations. But that being said, not all our objects are optimized yet, and that's something we're going to be rolling out in our subsequent releases. Now, also, just a reminder again, you require OpenGL 3.0 or better support for your video card. Now, one question that often comes up is, how do I take advantage of this new rendering in my SD objects? Say, for example, I have an image in a scene or a surface. Well, you don't have to do anything. When you open up an object or create a new object in Fledermaus 7.4, it will automatically be converted or created in the new format needed for rendering. So you don't have to worry about that. However, there is a time delay if you are loading a large surface or a large image that was created in 7.3 or older into 7.4. It has to do that conversion on the fly. So it'll do that at the beginning when you load the data object. It's a one-time thing when you first load that object. Now, if you want to avoid having to do that again each time you load the object, you would have to resave that object. You file save and create a new scene or create a new SD object. However, one thing to be aware of is that once you've saved that in the 7.4 format or created in the SD object in 7.4, that object is not backward compatible. You can no longer open that in Fledermaus 7.3 or 7.2. Now, our early beta feedback from this, that isn't something that's important to people. So what we're working on, and this is going to be coming out in our 7.4.1 release, we're going to add the ability to save an SD object in a backward compatible format. So you'll be able to just, for example, if you're working in a newer version of Microsoft Word, and you can save in an old version for people that don't have the latest, we're going to be adding that capability. But that is something to be aware of in 7.4. That if you're creating SD objects, they won't be compatible with older versions of Fledermaus right now. But we'll be addressing that in an upcoming release. So I wanted to stop there before I move into the next section, just to see if there's any questions or any concerns.
Hey, Danny. Just one minor thing. The right side of your screen is cut off. It hasn't affected the presentation so far, but if you anticipate any slides that might have information in, so like the last 5% on the right side, I don't know if that's a big concern. But the only question that we had so far related to the presentation was, would you be able to do a save object as for earlier versions, and you did address that, so I think we're good. I think if you go to PowerPoint and get out of your slideshow, there is a resolution option that might help you out. But don't crash in order to do it. But that's all. Thanks.
Okay, well, I'll take a second and reduce my resolution. Okay, is that better?
Yes, that's perfect. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Aaron. Okay, now I'll move on to the direct Quincy project support. This is something that we've been working on, and it's a key part of bringing the QPS products closer together. So what we did is we built it around the existing area-based editing tools. So if you're familiar with working with the PFM tools in Fledermaus, they'll be very familiar, very similar. And that's something we're going to move forward with. We're decoupling our tools from the spatial storage so that we'll have area-based tools that will be able to be used across different storage formats, different databases into the future. So right now, the big advantage is, as opposed to going through the PFM workflow, when you have direct Quincy project support, it eliminates a number of the time-consuming steps that are required. Because a lot of the work is already being done by Quincy. A lot of the work is already being done in the data structures and the formats that Quincy is producing. As well, we're also eliminating some time-consuming steps, but we're also adding some improved functionality. When you're reading formats directly, there's less conversion, and you can take advantage of certain things. And that really applies to, for example, the projection and geodetic support that now is a lot closer together between the two applications. So I'm just going to do a little review leading to where we currently are. If we look at our traditional area-based editing workflow, when we start with an acquisition or processing package, then we move into a third-party format. From there, what we've always done before is a PFM build, which is our structure for area-based editing. Then you could go into Fledermaus, do your editing, work with Cube, run some filters, do what you need to do. After that's complete, we would do a PFM unload operation that would put the edits, put your flagging back into that original third-party format, and you can move ahead with your workflow. Now the problem is the PFM building and unloading can be fairly time-consuming as your data sets get larger. That's something we've been working on, but it's still a time-consuming process. Now what we first did is we added our direct QPD reading. That was in the 7.3x range of releases. So from there, if you're working with Quincy, you don't have to worry about putting into a third-party format. You go directly into QPD. While a good step forward, it doesn't eliminate the biggest time-consuming steps of working with that data in Fledermaus. So now looking at where we were going with the 7.4 time frame, is we've eliminated having to by having direct reading, you're reading directly what Quincy is doing. You're not having to treat the QPD as a third-party format. That eliminates having to do a PFM build and a PFM unload and gives us a bidirectional workflow directly between Quincy and Fledermaus. The advantages there are really threefold. One, you obviously have a big speed improvement across your workflow because you've eliminated those data conversion and time spent building area-based structures when they already exist in the QPD and the Quincy project structure. We also now have the direct geodetic support so that the projections and the information that you're setting up in Quincy is directly brought into Fledermaus. And one thing that is now enabled is the bidirectional workflow. With a PFM structure, it is a single direction. Until you unload back to your source data format, you can't make any changes in your acquisition or your processing because you've made a disconnection between those two. When you're working with Quincy and Fledermaus with a direct project reading, you can work in Quincy, go into Fledermaus, do what you need to do in terms of editing, visualization, data fusion, but if at any point you need to go back and you want to and continue work in Quincy or do additional processing, you can do that immediately. You don't have to worry about the fact that you've converted into another format. It's a bidirectional workflow. So what are the requirements for using this new workflow? Well, you need the latest version of Fledermaus 7 Fledermaus, so that's 7.4.0. Actually, 7.4.A was just released. And you can use that on Windows 32-bit or 64-bit. The Linux and Mac versions of Fledermaus currently do not support the direct loading of the Quincy project. But that's okay. Most people will be using it on Windows anyway, so that's fine. Also, you need a Quincy project with a navigation surface. Now, you create that in the Processing Manager, and I'll show you a quick example of that. Now, to use Cube as part of this workflow, again, if you're familiar with using the Cube algorithm for creating a statistical surface for aiding and using your total propagated uncertainty as part of a statistical filter on your surface, Well, that's available with the upcoming release of Quincy. So that'll be any day now. It'll be an intermediate release of Quincy, and that'll enable the creation of Cube. Once that Cube surface is created, you'll be able to work with that in Fledermaus just like you can with a Cube surface with a PFM. So I'm just going to walk through a Quincy workflow example, starting right from the beginning with Quincy and then back in and ending in Fledermaus. So I'm going to start with the Quincy console, and assuming I've loaded a Quincy project, I've created I have DBs, I have my QPD data. What I'm going to need to do is go into the Processing Manager, so go to the Processing tab, icon, and that brings me into Processing Manager. From here I can see my data, I can see what I would normally see in Processing Manager. But what I don't have yet is a navigation surface. So that's something I want to create, and to do that I can go to the New menu and say Navigation Surface, which will make a new navigation surface. If you already have a navigation surface as part of your project, well, you can skip this step. You'll then be presented with the dialog to choose your cell size, what survey files to include, as well as how you want to process the online filter flags. Once you select those options and click OK, you'll just wait for a short period and it will make your navigation surface for you. Once that's complete, you'll see your navigation surface in your Quincy display. At this point, we could go directly into Fledermaus with this. I'm just going to go back one more step again and highlight the Cube options, which is part of the upcoming Quincy release. There's a checkbox which says Enable Cube Grid. If you want to work with Cube in Fledermaus with your Quincy project, you need to enable that option. Then you have the option to bring up the Cube settings dialog. Again, these are same settings that you would see in Fledermaus working with Cube. There's a nice configuration option for choosing shallow or deep water. You can also save your information in a configuration file. Then you can also adjust yourself any of the settings for creating the Cube surface. Now, normally if you want to do that, you would do this before you generated your nav surface, but it's okay. If you forget to do that, you can always go back, create a new surface that includes your Cube, as well as your navigation surface. What I can do now, if I go to the Project tab, you'll see that there's a Fledermaus button at the top right of your menu bar. Clicking that option will close Processing Manager and load that project directly into Fledermaus. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. When I go into Fledermaus, you'll start Fledermaus with that project loaded. And one thing, if you're not familiar with Fledermaus and the PFM workflow, when you first load an area-based editing object, what you will see is a coverage map. This is not your data. What this is showing you where you have data. Now the reason for that is as we optimize our grids, a PFM or a Quincy project can be quite large. So to work around memory limitations, our current approach is to present you with a coverage map, and then you either need to extract all of that data, and I'll give an example of that, or you can select a smaller area if it's a really large area. Now that is something that we're working towards eliminating, and that's combined with the graphics engine improvements. So that's the next step that we're going to be doing as we move to streaming our tiles off disk, so that you don't have to worry about how large a grid is when you're working on memory. But for now, it has the same expectations as when working with a PFM. Now, before I move forward, if I wasn't in Processing Manager, I can also load the same project from the, sorry, I jumped ahead there. I can also load that same project from the File menu by going to the Open Quincy project. From there, you choose your Quincy project directory, and you'll be back to the same location as when you launched it directly from Processing Manager. So to move forward, if you look at your tab in your Attributes panel of Fledermaus, there's an Extract drop-down. This is where you can either extract a selected region or extract an entire area. I'm going to go ahead and extract the entire area in this example, and now I can see that surface as the same I saw it in Quincy. And that's direct. There was no additional processing that needed to be done between the Quincy project being created and moving into Fledermaus. Now I'm just going to move around a little bit and give some examples. Looking at an area here, by default what you're going to see is the navigation surface, and you can see that in your surface display options. Just like with a PFM object, you can choose a couple different options, and I can move that to a cube surface. Now in this case the soundings are fairly clean, so the difference is fairly minimal. You might not even see the difference between the navigation and the cube surface. But you can choose between those two as you're doing your editing or your QC. Now I'm also going to move forward into our 3D editor. So I've highlighted an area on the surface, dragging out an area I'm interested in, and then I'll use the Launch 3D Editor button to bring that up in our 3D editor. So that will create a new window that comes up. Now seeing, instead of the gridded surface, I'll directly see the soundings for the area that I've highlighted. This is where I can dynamically flag soundings, set certain flags, reject data, even unreject data if I want to. So I'll just make that full screen so you can see the points there, and there's a number of different options that we can adjust. I'm going to turn off the points for a second, and then I'm going to turn on the hypotheses. This is part of the cube processing, and they're all visible in the 3D editor. So here, instead of seeing the individual soundings, I'm seeing the hypotheses that the cube algorithm has generated. I can see some areas where there was multiple hypotheses, but overall the cube algorithm has made a good choice of the surface. If I wanted to, I could get into cube processing, I could override hypotheses, or I could look at the soundings and edit. Sorry, just one second. Sorry about that. What I could do with my hypotheses editing, I could choose them and edit them. I'll just get a little closer and have a closer look at the hypotheses. You can see here the larger squares are the selected hypotheses. When you have a stock, that's an alternative hypothesis with a smaller square at its location. Now, in this situation, I've also turned on the sounding so we can see between what the cube algorithm has generated and the points. Now, looking at another area that I've moved to, I can see that there's some points here. Just for example, I'll use my lasso tool, highlight those soundings, flag them, and then I can reject them. Now at this point they're rejected in the 3D editor. Then I'll go up to my file, save and exit, or I can use a keyboard shortcut. But as soon as I do that save and exit, I go back and those changes are immediately applied to the navigation surface and the cube surface. If I quit Fledermaus at this point and go back into Quincy, the QPDs have been immediately updated. There is no unload process that you may be used to if you're working with a PFM. Those changes are immediately applied to the original source data, and that allows us to go back and forth between those two applications. Now I'm going to take a little minute to talk about coordinate systems. With 7.4 and importing a Quincy project, we are directly bringing in the coordinate system that is specified in the Quincy project. So I'm just going to zoom down here a little bit. So if you look at your georeferencing tab, you'll see a horizontal coordinate system. And what that will be described there is the exact coordinate system that was specified in Quincy. We are now supporting that within our software with some caveats, and that's an area that we'll be improving over a number of releases. One thing that is not currently imported is the vertical coordinate system or vertical datum. If that has been specified in Quincy, we currently do not import that. If there's an assumption that those are all, the way you work at that is the assumption in Fledermaus is that they have the same vertical datum and vertical coordinate system. So we can't change between those within a Fledermaus scene. If they are the same and they've been prepared as the same coordinate system, vertical coordinate system, then that'll be fine. Now here I'm just bringing up the, if you click on the dot 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 for the coordinate system, I can have a closer look at the coordinate system that came from Quincy. This is in the format that Fledermaus works with, and you'll also see that it's now been added as a user-defined coordinate system. That at the bottom. This is the one that came from Quincy. Once that has been added to your local coordinate system, you can use that to apply it to other data that you may have been bringing into your scene, if you have imagery or if you have other things like that. Or you can use it to project to one of the built-in coordinate systems. Now, if you notice when we were in the Quincy project, there was also some imagery in the Quincy project. By default, we don't load that immediately into Fledermaus. However, you can always go in, and in this case, you go to the Import menu, go to Import Image, and then I'll load an image, that image that was in the Quincy project. Now, at first, all I see is this red square in the area where that image should be. And if I look at my data objects, I can see that it's listed as undisplayable. If I look at the georeferencing tab for that, what I see is that it has a different coordinate system than what the project is in. So by default, we don't automatically project the imageries on the images and surfaces on the fly. We will project a square which shows you where it would be if you project it into the current coordinate system. But what I can do is do the reproject to scene option, the button down there, and what it will do, I'll just zoom into where it is. In that situation, I'll reproject to scene. It will take a minute, and it will project the image into the scene, or into the coordinate system of the scene. However, what you will often get is a warning. And what this warning is saying is that we don't have a direct path between those two coordinate systems. In Quincy, you can define in more detail how to get from your source to destination coordinate system. Right now in Fledermaus, we are just taking that source and using our built-in library. We will be improving that in the upcoming releases. But for now, it's just going to warn you that it's going to be using a built-in conversion, which may not have the same accuracy as the one that you set up in Quincy. But I bring that in, and my imagery has been brought in. Now, again, the other part, when you bring an imagery, because we're in a 3D space now, we don't see where my bathymetry is. I just see my image. In the area of water, it's still imagery. So what you can do there is you mask out the area. To do that, you select your image, and on your image tab, there's a mask out areas. You go in your tools, and you calculate the mask. Once you do that, it will look for anywhere where you have your bathymetry, and it will punch a hole in your image so that you can see through. Now, in this situation, I've projected my image, and I've also created a mask. In the future, I don't want to have to do those things again. So what you can do is go up to your Fledermaus file menu, go to Save Scene, and save this, what you've been working with, as a scene file. You can then open that up next time, and it will have your Quincy project loaded. It will also have your image in the projection that you converted it to, as well as with the masked out areas. So that saves you time. You could individually save that image as well if you wanted to, and that would preserve the projection and the masking. So what are some of the restrictions? We want to be clear on what the restrictions are in the current implementation of our direct Quincy loading. One is that you cannot have Quincy and Fledermaus open at the same time, working on the same project. That's just to prevent them stepping on each other's toes. You can do a bidirectional workflow, but you can't have them both open at the same time. That's a restriction that will probably not go away in the foreseeable future. It's not really a big limitation. It's more something to be aware of. The other area to be aware of is when you're working with a multi-sensor system. For example, you have a vessel with a multi-beam underwater and maybe a laser scanning the side of the seawall. If you want to create a navigation surface with only your multi-beam, and when you create that, you can select that. However, in Fledermaus, it's not aware yet of you making that selection. So if you have a multi-sensor system that is, for example, dual-head multi-beam, multiple multi-beam, that's fine. It's when you want to exclude one of your systems into your navigation surface. Right now, Fledermaus does not have any ability to know that you've excluded one of those systems. So when you do edits and you do recubing, it's going to bring back in all the data from all the sensors. We'll be addressing that very shortly in one of our upcoming releases. Also, not all the PFM features are available on this first release of the Quincy project. For example, flag displays on the surface is not currently available. Again, these are just some small things that we wanted to get this functionality out first, and then we'll add some of these other little functionalities in a subsequent release. Also, there are a few operations, because we're working with a completely different data structure, they're a little slower than the equivalent PFM. One of the big things, biggest areas there is the cube sounding filter. If you use the cube sounding filter, which is once you are comfortable with your cube surface, you can use that surface to filter all of your sounding data. That operation can be considerably slower when you're working with a Quincy project. Again, we have fixes in place and in optimizations for that upcoming, so in the near future that will be as fast and then faster than doing those same functionality with a PFM. Also, as I mentioned, there's no vertical coordinate system support in Fledermaus, so you have to ensure that you're not mixing your vertical coordinate systems in Fledermaus. So I'll take another quick break there for any questions, Erin?
Hi, Danny. Yes, we have some questions. We have quite a few, so let me move up. The first thing you might want to address is you have some people trying to do this right now. So are we waiting on an update Quincy release? That's my first question.
Yeah, if you want to use Cube as part of this process, as part of your workflow, yes, you need to wait for the upcoming Quincy intermediate release, which should be any day now. However, if you're not using Cube, you can use that with any version of Quincy within the last, I think, over the last year and a half. If you have the capability of building a navigation surface, you can do that now, but you won't have the ability to use Cube.
Okay, so if you're having problems out there, email, let us know, let support know that you're having an issue. All right, moving down. Okay, as part of the editing workflow, oh, never mind, I answered that one, sorry. Okay, this one, how does this interact with edits made in cloud?
It would interact the same. Once the edits are made, if they are made in cloud and they're part of the QPDs, if they've been applied back, then that will also be part of what you see and edit with and can edit in Fledermaus. I mean, that's the cloud workflow. I'd have to follow up with that one. That may be something that we can direct to Eric or Duco in terms of when the cloud edits are applied to the QPDs.
Okay. Eric is on our panel, so Eric, if you have anything to add, feel free to speak up. In the meantime, is it possible to color lines in the 3D editor by line still? So I think this is specifically with the Quincy projects. Can you color by line?
The Quincy projects?
When you bring the navigation surface into the 3D editor, can you color by line?
That's one of the features that is currently not available in the 7.4 release, but we'll be making that available in the 7.4.1 release that's upcoming. Also, just to clarify, I do have the confirmation on the cloud editing. Once that you're finished editing in cloud, you have to you can do the QPD synchronized. Once you do that synchronization, any further editing or opening in Fledermaus, the edits will be maintained from cloud, and you'll be able to see them as rejected, and you can either unreject or continue editing.
Okay. I think this question relates to the last one, but somebody else noticed that some things were missing in the 3D editor, like target editing, so that's probably also just coming down the road.
Yes. The target editing won't be in 7.4.1. That'll be a little bit after that, but the other the main areas, the remaining filters, the filter optimization, and surface displays, things like that, will all be in 7.4.1.
All right. This says, I have QPD files from several platforms located in subfolders in the QPD folder. Will all these be loaded directly also?
It depends on it. When you create the navigation surface, if you select all of those, yes, they will all be brought in as part of that, and they'll make it all the way into Fledermaus.
Okay, and then the final question, and then we'll get back and save the rest of the questions for the end. As far as loading a cube surfaces, the question is what format do we support in the loading of cube surfaces? And I think the question relates to, like if you've built a cube surface in something like Keras, we can't read that cube surface, or can we?
No, we can't.
Okay.
No. pretty much the different vendor implementations of Cube are pretty much all unique and proprietary. So there's not a common Cube format that we can work with. You basically, when you're generating a Cube surface, that's in our own format.
Okay. All right, so we'll let you continue on, and if there's any other questions, we'll address them at the end.
Okay, thanks again, Aaron. Okay, moving forward, I want to talk just a little bit on the FMGT midwater workflow. So in addition to the improved integration between Quincy and Fledermaus, there's also been a number of improvements between Quincy and GT and midwater. Right now we're at the point where we have direct support for importing the QPD DB data from Kongsberg, Rezon, and R2Sonic Systems. So that covers a lot of your systems. However, there are other systems, and just to highlight, the EdgeTech and GeoSWAT systems, they still require an export from Quincy to the XTF GSF pairs. So we're working towards that, but that's still some requirement for those sensors. So just be careful and make sure you're aware of your systems. And any questions, please get in touch with support so that we can try to answer those questions. Also, with the direct support, we are still currently doing a conversion to GSF when you're importing those QPD DBs. And that's one thing that's also on the near horizon, is being able to work directly on that QPD DB data without having that back-end conversion to GSF data. However, we do have the current situation where you can import these sonars. Now, I want to highlight a few different parts with the current FMGT. One thing with R2Sonic Systems, with the latest releases, this is the latest 7.3 as well as 7.4, you no longer need to set the head offset when you're importing from the Quincy project. Also, there was a number of fixes to remove biases in the range offset of the snippet time series, and this was done. It occurred during the production of the GSF files when you were importing from the Quincy project. Now, those biases often resulted in low backscatter values at nadir, and people saw that in their data. So both of those things have been fixed, but it's important to be aware of if you were dealing with these problems in the past. So what you should do, you should re-import the DB QPD pairs to generate new GSF files if you were having that problem. Then you would then have to move forward with reprocessing the backscatter and generating a new mosaic. However, if you didn't have those problems, if you have clean GSF files, you only need to reprocess the backscatter and generate a new mosaic. However, in both situations, you have to remember to reset the valid data range to -70 to 10 dB. So you have to, if you have those issues, if you're working with R2Sonic data, be aware of these changes and these fixes that have solved these problems. But you have to go back and generate these new GSF files, and as well as make sure to remove that offset that may have been put in there. Also, I really want to highlight your setup in Quincy when you want to be using GT and midwater. So basically, make sure your Quincy is set up properly to record the required datagrams. This is especially important for Kongsberg systems. Now, I'll just highlight one of the most important parts, but there's a full knowledge base article on our website, and I just have a shortened URL here that you can use to get to that article. You can also request it from support, or you can go into the search our knowledge base on setting up Quincy for the GT midwater. It's really important that whatever setup and however confident you are with your setup in Quincy is that before you go offshore, before you start recording a lot of data, that you test the full workflow. So try to do, as soon as possible, test your Quincy setup, record some data, and bring that into GT and midwater, because that's the best way to ensure that what you set up is capturing the data that you need to do the backscatter and midwater processing. We really don't want you to spend time collecting data only to realize after the fact that things weren't set up properly to record that data. So looking at in detail, in your driver-specific parameters, you have to make sure that it is set up to record the snippets and C-bit imagery and the bathymetry. So you have to, where the big arrow is pointing, you have to have both activated for recording the raw bathymetry storage and the raw snippet storage. That's very important. So that's just something to be very careful with to make sure you're collecting all the data that you need to move forward in the applications. Okay, just rounding out near the end of the presentation, there's a few usability improvements that make things easier for you. One of the big things is we've now moved into a common QPS install for the software. For a long time it was still in the legacy IVS. Now, other than just a nice thing to be all under the QPS location, easier to find, it also means that we can reshare amongst the applications some common files. So that reduces the size footprint of all our applications. And this is something, again, we'll be improving and integrating further. Things like your large grid datum shift files that you might be using, they can now be found by both applications. Also, we now have independent installation support. The previous versions of Fledermaus really, although you could kind of work around it, it wasn't very good at having multiple versions on one machine. Now we've encapsulated everything to a single install. So this means you can install multiple versions, 7.4, 7.3, on your machine. 7.3, because it doesn't have all the new improvements, will still be a little finicky, but moving forward, as you get new version of the software, you may want to test one out. There may be different things that you know, if you're working with somebody else on a specific version, it's a lot easier to do that. You can just install in independent directories, and they won't step on each other. Now, this is also important for a 32-bit and 64-bit on Windows. There are still some things, because of third-party libraries and third-party SDKs, that you can only do in the 32-bit version of Fledermaus. So a lot of people still have to maintain that version around. However, if you want to take advantage of your full memory space and the 64-bit data structures, you want to also use your 64-bit version. So some people switch between those two, and we've made it a lot simpler, a lot cleaner in this release. Now with that, you also have independent preferences and file history. So these really are independent individual installations that are not going to step on each other. Another part that we've improved is the licensing. This has always been a bit of a nag for people, and we've made it a lot clearer. So there's a new licensing dialog. If you start the software and you don't have a license, or you go into the help and choose to look at your license status, it's a lot quicker than it used to be, and it's very clear of what components you have a license for and which ones you don't. Now, you also have the option here to install a license file, and one of the real important things that can be tricky sometimes, if you move the System Details tab, you can also see the license folders. It can show you at the system level and at the user level where it's finding your licenses. Because sometimes people, you may have installed a license somewhere and you just don't know where Fledermaus is finding that. So that's an important thing for knowing where your licenses are installed, as well as this tab also allows you to look at what your dongle IDs or your Ethernet IDs are for your licensing. So now I'm just getting to a few of the bits and bobs part of the presentation. So just finishing up, we now have a 64-bit Mac OS X version, and there's no real reason on Mac to keep a 32-bit version. So we've now fully replaced that. That comes with a few advantages that you often get with 64-bit machines. So to summarize, right now Linux and Mac are 64-bit only, and Windows is 32-bit and 64-bit, and it'll probably be that way for a little while, as we still have third-party and SDKs that are not 64-bit yet on Windows. But Linux and Mac are 64-bit only now. Also wanted to highlight that you may have missed it. We didn't do a webinar there for a little while, so there was a number of profiling enhancements throughout some of the 7.3x releases of the software. Greatly enhance what we could do with the profiling. You can create a profile object, do cross profiles dynamically in your scene, as well as the ability to do multi-point profiling and dynamically adjust those profiles on the fly directly in the Fledermaus scene. So there's some great enhancements there that you may have missed. It's worth trying checking those out and seeing if they help you or they're useful for you. In terms of upcoming releases, we have a 7.4.0a, which actually was released yesterday. That was a few critical fixes following on from that first release. And then as I've been talking about, there's a 7.4.1 release, which is scheduled around mid-April, which is going to continue with a lot of things that I talked about today, particularly with the Quincy integration and our geodetic support. So just a little preview of what's upcoming in the 7.4.1. Like I said, direct Quincy loading optimizations. So that's really looking at the filters that might be a bit slower and phasing in all the remaining parts from the area-based editing tools. Also, looking at the next phase of graphics improvements, so going beyond just using the frame rate optimizations, and particularly for points. Using the GPU for our point data is a big part of the next release. Also, bringing more projection support into Fledermaus, so that's looking at what we're doing to make that as seamless as possible between those two projections. Also, there's some new statistical analysis tools for working on surfaces, areas of surfaces, and things like that. We also are incorporating some plugins that were developed at the University of New Hampshire at CCOM. So these are new filtering and automatic target detection of targets such as seeps in FMGT. You'll be able to bring that directly into Fledermaus. Just a little screenshot of some of that work in progress, just showing some of the filtering that's applied on the water column. And sorry, if I go back there, that should be, I said FMGT, that's incorrect. That's in midwater. So that's FM midwater. There's an error on that slide. So here we're looking at a despeckling and a normalization filter that's applied, and that just leads into the first steps of doing the automatic target detection. And that's all coming from these plugins that we're incorporating from the University of New Hampshire. So that rounds out the presentation, and just I have some time for any final questions, Aaron, that people may have.
Okay, thanks, Danny. We had one question. Are there any speed improvements for the traditional PFM creation? So not related to being a Quincy user, just people who've been using Fledermaus independently.
Not in this release.
Okay. And oh, this one was important. I did address it to everybody when I replied, but you should probably mention it again. Direct support for R2Sonic Systems, are we referring to true pix data or snippets? So a good time to clear that up.
Okay.
So we do direct support of the snippets. Yeah, sorry, we do direct support of the snippets through the Quincy project. You can't, we do not read the TruePix. The only way to get TruePix in right now, as far as I know, is as XTF. They are a different data type. They're not true snippet information, so we can't support it directly that way yet. We may be doing some improvements to that, but I can't say what exactly they are. And then another question, is spline filtering somewhere on the roadmap? I'm assuming in the Fledermaus part?
Yes. That is something that, or I'm not sure exactly where that will sit in the release, but we'll be looking at what functionality we can add in that area.
Okay, I think that's all the questions we have.
Okay.
I just have one thing I wanted to mention. Are you all finished, Danny?
I think I have one more slide.
Okay.
It's just like I say, any problems, especially if you're having problems with your Quincy project opening in Fledermaus. This is very new, and we want to make sure that we have this really good. So please let us know if you have a Quincy project and you're having problems opening it in Fledermaus. Let us know. You go to the website, as Aaron described, also in Fledermaus. If you go to help about Fledermaus, there's information there about how to contact support. And again, don't forget, please contact me. Questions, concerns, bigger picture items in terms of what you want to see the software do. Let me know. I'll be at the Canadian Hydrographic Conference coming up in April. Track me down, please. I want to hear from you. Then that's all I have.
Okay, then the last thing I wanted to say, we did have some people who are really new to the suite that were on this webinar, and like Danny said, we assume some level of familiarity, but we have many, many recorded webinars and other documentation. So if you are someone who's new and you would like some more kind of basic information on some of the stuff that Danny discussed, just contact me. You can reply to the webinars at qps.nl email, and that's where you got information about this webinar from. So just let us know, and I can give you additional resources to familiarize yourself with the software. All right, I think that's all. So thank you, everybody, for attending, and thank you, Danny, for presenting.
You're welcome. Thank you, everybody, for spending some time with us.
All right, bye-bye. Thank you.